Hello and welcome to episode 181 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert as always, Damien Fay and me, Andy Leaks. Damien, we're back after a week off. Apologies, mainly down to me, I think. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm good, Andy. I'm very good, in fact. I'm slightly euphoric. Well, one of the reasons you say it was down to you, but technically I got sidetracked in a very... It was for very positive reasons, so it was mainly down to me, but you were on holiday too. So before we jump on to what I've been up to, how was your week, Andy?
Oh, it was amazing. It really was. It's rare that I take a proper holiday. I do take some time off work for various reasons here and there, but it's generally to sort of attend sad things like funerals or boring things like, I don't know, school visits, or it tends to be for functional reasons rather than sort of fun. But we had a week away and it was lovely. Went to Wales. We've been to Wales many times. My family, my distant family and stuff come from Wales. And every time I've gone across that bridge, the heavens has opened and it's just been awful, even though we've always gone in the summer. But this time round, we had sunshine and it was amazing. We spent time walking in the fields and the forests and just having a great time with the family, really. It was really nice.
Oh, good. I mean, those pesky Welsh mountains. I remember I lived in sort of Coventry, Birmingham area when I was at university, and it rained for the 3 years I was there, and that was a result of the Welsh mountains, I think. But it was good you had some time off, Andy. It was well deserved. By contrast, at my end, I wasn't on holiday, but this next section, the first section of this podcast, I'm going to hijack to talk about something that's very important to me personally, which was the result of what I'd been up to for the last week. So don't jump forward into the podcast. I mean, we've done 181 episodes. It's not often that I hijack the podcast or talk about something that's actually very interesting, but something that affects me personally.
You say not often, Damien. I would say this is possibly the first time ever. So that's not bad in 181 episodes, is it?
It's not bad, Andy. But we tried to just talk about money, but this is money related. Now, when we recorded the last episode of the podcast, I made a decision after that whereby I decided to do a charity walk. Now, for anybody who listens to this podcast, you may have picked up from time to time the odd comment about me suffering from Crohn's disease. Now,
picked up? You don't stop banging on about it, for goodness sake.
What I'm going to do is give people a bit more background onto that, because as a result of some sort of correspondence, I ended up joining in on a Crohn's walk and for 10k distance in London. And now what we did is Justin, who's my twin and another instrumental part of Money to the Masses behind the scenes, he also suffers from Crohn's very badly. And what we decided to do was give ourselves a challenge to raise a certain amount of money in a very short space of time. We had 6 days until the event. We should have been doing it for months before, but we only decided 6 days before the event to actually take part. So it was a walk around central London that is an organised walk. We have about 2,000 people do it, and they try and raise as much money as possible. So we came up with an idea how we're going to raise the money. So the challenge we set ourselves was to raise £2,000 for Crohn's and Colitis UK, which is the main charity in the UK that helps people with Crohn's and funds research. But if we hit the £2,000, we were also going to match it. So moneytothemasses.com was going to give another £2,000 to therefore take up to £4,000. Now, to put that into perspective, that would make us the biggest charitable donators in this entire walk across the whole of the UK, about sort of 600-700 people. Now, I want to just tell people before you disappear off and fast forward the reason why this is important. Now, those who don't know, I do suffer from Crohn's disease, and when I was 21 I was diagnosed, and actually basically what happened, my bowel ruptured, so I didn't know what was going on. I was in incredible amounts of pain. My doctor told me to get off his surgery floor, and it was only because my brother at the time, who'd been suffering badly with Crohn's, he'd lost about 4 stone, went down to 7 stone in weight and had various surgery at that time. He mentioned to his consultant, and fast forward, they took me in, bypassed the usual methods in the NHS, and realised that my bowel had ruptured, and then I had my first operation of many. Now, over the years, I've had 3 operations to remove portions of my bowel where it's ruptured. Now, Crohn's disease is whereby your bowel can become incredibly inflamed, and it's an autoimmune disease. So what happens is your immune system starts to attack the lining of your intestine, and it can attack it anywhere from your throat all the way down to the tail end of your intestine. So it means when it attacks it, it becomes incredibly inflamed. If it doesn't stop, it can rupture, or it can become so narrowed that no food passes through. And the only way to treat that is to cut that portion of the bowel out and rejoin it up. So get a bit like getting a hose pipe, cutting the bit out, joining it back up. Now, unfortunately for me, that's happened 3 times. So I've lost 5 meters of bowel over the years, and that has its own issues. But this isn't me discussing sort of all my own medical history, but you can understand why it's so important to me, because there's a huge physical impact, and there's things that problems I have because of it now, tiredness, some of the malnutrition stuff that comes with it, exhaustion. I've had numerous blood transfusions. These things are sent to try us. And the other thing, it is a mental drain. Going through that and the recovery each time it's happened to me is tough. And unfortunately, I was given the bad news 2 weeks ago that I've got it. Crohn's disease come back in 2 new places in my intestine. So one of them just after my stomach, and another one a little bit further on. So I think before Christmas I took some time. I missed the podcast because I didn't feel well. Well, I found out why. So we decided that it was about time that we wanted to do something about the disease, and it's not going to help us, but it's going to help other people out there. So we decided to take on this challenge. Now, where we are with the challenge is that we managed to raise the £2,000 via lots of social media work and emails, etc. And the generosity of people who follow Money to the Masses was astounding. Now, if you go onto justgiving.com/fundraising/ Money to the Masses, you'll see our story and why it's important. I sort of tell you the full story of why we are supporting Crohn's, and there are some pictures on there of me having to have some of the infusions and things I have in the last few weeks. Now, you podcast guys were my secret weapon, because I know I have an affinity with you guys. I talk to you every week, although I don't talk to you personally. I feel like I do, and lots of you get in touch and email me all the time, or on Twitter. Now, I know a number of you have already sponsored me, and Justin and our endeavour to raise this money. Now, we did raise the £2,000. Money to the Masses matched that £2,000, and we've had donations after that, and now we're sitting at £4,597. So I just want to throw it out there to you guys and the podcast listeners to see if you could just raise another £400 for me. And now I'd love to see this go over £500, and the reason is because with just a £30, the charity can give 100 people the information they need about Crohn's and colitis. With about just over £100, they can fund a day's research into the disease and potentially cure it one day. More importantly, it costs £1,200 to pay for the training of an IBD nurse. That's inflammatory bowel disease nurse. So with the money we've raised so far, that pays for 3 of those, and we'd quite like to do more. So if you could spare a few pennies, that would be wonderful. £400, it would be great if we could get over £5,000. And we had a fantastic day when we did the walk. We met some fantastic people, and like I said, I am very, very grateful for those of you who have sponsored us so far. If I could meet you and thank you personally, I would, because this is something that's very personal to me. So yeah, go to the Just Giving website and you'll find Money to the Masses, and please sponsor us.
Well, Damien, you said there if you could thank them personally, you would. I think it's well within my abilities and our abilities to kind of do just that in the next podcast. I think we should, if anyone out there is kind enough to donate to this amazing cause, then please just pop a little note on there. You don't necessarily have to give your full name or details if you want to stay, if you want to put a nickname on there or whatever. But if you mention Money to the Masses podcast, if you say you're a podcast listener and you got in touch because of what you've just heard there from Damien, then pop it on the notes and we'll give you a credit at the end of next week's podcast. When we run the music towards the end of next week's podcast, I think we'll reel off the names of people who have been kind enough to donate and helped Damien get over that crucial £5,000 mark, which he so richly deserves. So how about that? Do you think that's a good idea?
I think it's a brilliant idea, and what I love about this is that by doing what we do, and you and I give away content, we hopefully entertain people, and with the website and 80/20 Investor and everything we do, one of the big things I've noticed and was really inspiring were the comments people left to say thank you for what you do. This is just a small donation towards it. And I like the idea that if you give stuff to the world, it gives back. And I think that this is quite a nice way that we do something for help people with finances. It enables us to help people with Crohn's disease, which is something very personal to me. So yeah, let's do that. But enough of my charity work. Let's get on with the money stuff, Andy.
What have we got coming up on this week's pod?
Right, there's some good news regarding a reform in the banking system, in the way that you can inform banks if somebody dies. Unfortunately, at the moment, it's always been that if somebody dies and you have to go and try and inform financial institutions about that death, it can actually be very painful and far more painful than it should be. And there's been a change, a reform in the industry that is fantastic news, which I want to talk people through so that they're aware of it. I also want to talk about Robo-Advice, because I was asked this week about the future of Robo-Advice, and off the back of a piece of research that stated that people don't want to use robo-advisors. And a robo-advisor is one of those digital online services like Nutmeg, like Money Farm, like Wealth Simple, where they run your money for you, but it's done online and usually with low-cost investments like ETFs. Now, I want to talk about what's happening with that in that market in the UK and where it's going. And then finally, I just want to give you a couple of just very quick tidbits of what I've been talking about on Twitter. Now, I've been very active on Twitter at the moment. I've really got into the social media element of money to the masses in the last few weeks. I've seen the power and the good that social media can do when you rally people to a cause, and it's been fantastic. And I've been even more vocal about money stuff on there and giving people views about things and sharing stuff on there. So if you don't follow us on social media, then do on Money to the Masses with the number 2 on Twitter, and obviously Money to the Masses on Facebook and Instagram. And we're doing more and more, and I can just give you a bit of snippet of a sort of preview. We're going to do a hell of a lot more this year, so get involved.
Okay, so exciting news on the banking reform. Hopefully things are going to be a little bit easier in what is going to be probably the most stressful time for a loved one. So what's happened now?
Right, what's happened is that there has been a change, a service that has launched to make informing financial institutions about a loved one's death that much easier. Now, at the moment, what would happen is that if you had a family member or somebody die, then you would have to go through all of the paperwork that they have and then try and tell different institutions individually. So you can imagine there'd be people who've sat down at a dining room table, emptied shoe boxes on the table, trying to find policy numbers and then trying to find telephone numbers of these institutions they can ring up. And then what normally happens is when they ring them, they don't have a dedicated helpline. So they're going through having to tell people over and over again and reliving that unfortunate thing of maybe a parent dying, and then the staff typically are badly trained in this situation or don't know what they should be doing or who they should be informing internally. And there'll be people listening to this podcast who've gone through this and they'll be nodding away and saying it was terrible. And the other problem is there's no standardised paperwork. So if you ring one institution, they may need certain bits of paperwork or evidence from you, whereas another one might not. So that's the problem people have had. And over the years, there's been pressure to try and change that. And now, oddly, the government has itself has its own sort of tell us once type service, whereby if a death is registered at the register's office, then they can automatically cancel a national insurance number, they can cancel state benefits, even down to disability badges. And so that all can happen via one form. So it begs the question, why can't we do that with financial institutions? Now, a service has just been launched, and it's been launched today actually, called deathnotificationservice.co.uk. Now, it's run by a tech company called Equinity. And the simple premise of it is that if you go there, you can set up an account online that is secure, and you can therefore put in information and tell at a push of a button, or it can be done by telephone if you want to, a whole range of financial institutions that have signed up to this service about a person's death. Now, you also have time frames in which You can tell them about additional information, because of course, if you go back to that image of looking at paperwork on a table, then at some point you're probably going to be going through their house and find other account numbers and things that go, well, I didn't know about that one. And then you can add that to the service and inform them. And what happens if you sign up, you get given a secure link to the service via email, and you can then put in the details, typically like names, dates of birth, addresses, references from any death certificates, and it will fire the information out to relevant banks. Now, at the moment, the banks that are covered are Barclays, Lloyds, Nationwide, the Building Society, RBS. Well, when you say RBS, that covers their subsidiary, their brands that are under that umbrella group. So that's NatWest, Santander, HSBC are even signed up, and that would include the likes of First Direct. So in the future, it will expand. They are planning to push it out to smaller banks and smaller building societies, but it is a big step in the right direction, because the problem is, at the time when people are probably the most stressed and not able to think straight, they're having to tackle something, and some of the call centres, and you know what it's like, Andy, we've all been there trying to resolve something. You're not in the right state of mind to even do it. And I'll just give you that web address again. It's deathnotificationservice.co.uk.
Excellent stuff. So what was the Twitter bit that you were talking about, the little bit?
Now, there was some economic news in the UK that wasn't wonderful. I mean, if every month there's the same cycle, we play the same game, whereby we get unemployment stats that come out on one day, and at the same time there are stats on the wage growth in the UK, and then typically a day or two later we get the statistics, the official statistics on the UK inflation rate. Now, in the UK, and like everywhere else in the world where there's a central bank, what they will do, they'll look at different economic indicators to decide whether they're going to raise rates or lower them. In the UK, the data that they're very closely looking at is obviously the economic stability. So you get things like how well the retail sector's doing or the service sector. But from the consumer's point of view, they're very interested in wage growth. And the reason they're interested in wage growth is because if you start getting wage growth in the economy, so people are asking for pay rises and getting them, it starts to mean they've got more money to spend. And if there's more money swashing around in the economy, it means there's more money chasing the same number of goods. And that is what causes inflation. So that causes prices to rise. It's supply and demand. So that sort of inflation is more sticky because it's actually driven by the idea that everybody's getting more money, as opposed to something like a spike in the oil price, which can be just a temporary thing that can then sort of subside. So what the Bank of England and other central banks will do is that starts to rise. They start looking for early signs of inflation becoming ingrained. And if it does, they tend to raise interest rates to calm it down. It's a bit like changing up the gear in a car. You do that, it brings the engine revs down. It's the same principle, really. And at the same time, in the UK, we had the UK inflation wage data not being as good as people had thought, so it was towards the low end. Inflation data was a little bit softer, so the actual inflation data itself wasn't as high as people thought it would be. So that took or takes the pressure at the moment off the Bank of England to raise rates, which people are waiting for them to do it this year. So to round that all up, and it does slightly timestamp this bit, there is a 4% chance now of a rate rise in June. Now the rate rise meeting is in the I think it's the 23rd. It's basically next week. And there's a 50% chance now, the market thinks, of a rate rise in August. Now, the reality is the market very rarely gets it right in terms of predicting when rate rises occur. But the general direction of travel, they do tend to get right. So when it's going to be cut, they normally get that right. If it's going to go up, they normally sort of guess it. That's the first thing. The second thing is I did a tweet, which you can find, where I did a roundup of all the rises that have been announced by energy companies in the UK. So British Gas, Empower, all of them. They've all announced price rises to their standard tariffs in the last couple of weeks. Some have occurred, some are due to occur in June, some in July, some in August. As a general rule of thumb, the average rise in utility bills is going to be between 5 to 7%. So the moral of that tweet is fix your energy bills if you're on a standard tariff. You need to switch, basically. And interestingly, the summer is always a good time to look at your energy bills, because a lot of people fall onto their standard tariffs because they fix for the winter periods. So they'll fix for 1 winter, 2 winters, and then they end up, when it gets to the summer, they tumble onto the standard rate and pay more money. So check your energy bills and shop around. Before we move on, Andy, I just wanted to quickly mention 80/20 Investor. Now, 80/20 Investor is my DIY investment service. Do go and check it out. I empower and teach people how to invest their own money. The service provides data-driven fund tables. The data is driven by my own unique 80/20 Investor algorithm, which I created. You also get stop-loss alerts, you get research articles and insights, you get market commentaries, monthly commentaries, and DIY investment lessons, but you also get access to my £50,000 portfolio, which is a portfolio of my own money, which I run live on the site for members to see, and it shows people how I use the service to maximise my returns. And in the first 2 years of doing so, I turned £50,000 into £59,500, which is a 19% return, beating investment managers, professional fund managers, financial advisors, investment banks, passive trackers, and the market. So everybody can have a free 30-day trial of 80/20 Investor, and you can claim that by going to moneytothemasses.com and going and clicking on the 80/20 Investor hyperlink at the top of the page. So go and try the service. Let me know what you think of it, and I know from the feedback that you're going to love it. But for now, on with the show.
Okay then, Damien, the last piece then, the future of Robo, or specifically Robo-Advice. What have we got?
Right, this was inspired by a request from a journalist that I had on one of the national newspapers to talk about my view on some research that had been carried out on the prevalence of robo-advice being used in the UK and the future of it. Now, before I get into that, as a sort of, I don't know, a bit of a dipstick on this, Andy, would you use a robo-advisor? Now, I've briefly explained earlier what a robo-advisor is, but it's basically an online digital manager, and a lot of it is automated, a lot of it is done by computer algorithms, but it's very cheap. So there's very little human intervention. It's normally a kind of off-the-shelf product. Would you use one? The likes of Nutmeg, Money Farm, Wealthsimple, Wealthify, I could go on, but I won't.
Personally, yes, because I've really taken the step in the last few months, year, to try and automate as much as I can in my personal life. I used a service called Flipper, and they constantly check and monitor my energy bills, and they flip me over to a new tariff when it becomes available. So yeah, I probably would if I had the money to invest. Just a note on that, I don't, but if I did, I would probably be interested in going down the robo. It doesn't scare me.
Yeah, and this is the point. The research that was put out there was suggesting that the whole of the UK pretty much were petrified of robos and didn't trust them and wanted human intervention and human advisors all the way. Now, I mean, there were stats in there to say that only about 10% of people would ever use a robo-advisor. And they were asking me, what did I think about this, and was there a future for robo-advice, and what did I think about the uptake? Now, like all bits of research, there's always a motive. So whenever you see an article in the newspaper, play the game. Who wrote the research and what do they do? So whether it's robo-advice, whether it's mortgages, or whatever the angle is, the person who normally produces the research is got a reason for the result to come out in a certain way, otherwise they won't publish it, and then they push it to a journalist, and the journalist then writes a story around it. But when looking at this, I mean, we're in a position where I see what goes on in the investment world. I see what people tend to do in terms of buying or DIY investing. So the people who go for advice, the people who go for DIY investing and make their own decisions. So that's like with Hargreaves, and even using things like 80/20 Investor. There's obviously the other end of the spectrum. People just go, do you know what? I just want to invest, but I want it taken care of. So they go down the robo route. And there is a real cross spectrum of this stuff. Now, at the moment in the UK, undeniably, people are still towards the end of getting someone in, having an advisor, and more importantly, trying to do it themselves via investment platforms like Hargreaves Lansdown, Fidelity, AJ Bell. And robo-advice is becoming more prevalent. Now, I think at the moment, I'm going to pull this out of the air because I remember reading it before, but to give you some context, in terms of all the assets that are in the UK that have been invested in Robo-Advice versus the major sort of platforms, I think it's only around about 1% going to Robos. But that is increasing. We're seeing it. I see it. It's increasing. And the fact that they're trying to say that people don't really want it, what will happen, and what I'm seeing is with the market, as more and more propositions come along, the more likely people are to become willing to accept this new technology. Now, one of the biggest challenges facing the robo-advice world was slightly alluded to in an FCA report. That's the Financial Conduct Authority, the regulator. They carried out a report about what the different robos were doing, and they said it was a bit confusing, and it is confusing because some offer discretionary services. That means they'll just invest on your behalf without asking you. Others will just have almost like a model portfolio that anyone gets, and it's one size fits all. Others offer some form of advice, advice. Some offer no advice, and they compare themselves to each other, and it just muddies the water. Now, the problem they've got in the robo world, they don't want the term robo. They deem themselves just to be whoever they are, Money Farm or just Nutmeg. The fact is they've been lumped together. Now, until they become very clear about what they offer and what they don't, and it becomes clearer to consumers, I think people will be reticent, or more reticent, about taking them up. I do think that we're going to be a decade away from when robo-advice becomes truly like mainstream, where it becomes something that people are going to do almost by default if they haven't got a reason to go and do something else, especially if they're DIY investing. And to give you a steer, Nutmeg have about 1.5 billion, I think, or just over 1 billion, sorry, of assets under management. Now, that's nothing. In a fund would be considered of a decent size if it got over 1 billion. Just one fund. You get fund houses that have loads. Neil Woodford had at one point £32 billion invested in his funds alone. That shows you the scale of the numbers. And the amount of marketing people like Nutmeg produce, that shows you that how hard they're having to work for that. One thing I do think will happen is the non-human world will have to start to make changes. Now, the good thing about a lot of this passive investing stuff, whether it is a robo or something just like Vanguard, which is a platform that just has cheap trackers on it, is it's driving down the cost, and it's also causing people to start to question how much they pay for services that do have human intervention and what value those humans are adding. So if you think about it, people are either going to be moving more down towards the end of cheaper, more automated AI type products, or what will happen more likely is, I think, that a lot of the human intervention type products, fund managers, etc., are going to have to cut their costs, and to do that they're going to have to use more automated processes, which means that as a proposition it starts to move more towards the robo end, but only just in sort of small amounts. So it's not what it is now, where it's seat of the pants job, where a manager's decided what he does. It's got more of perhaps a process and more of a computer-driven algorithm that's making decisions. I think that's already started to happen anyway in the investment world. And one of the things, I always try and draw the analogy with other industries. Now, other industries, if you want to see where our market is going in the UK, first thing to do is look at where it's going in the US. So the first thing I would say is Vanguard are massive in the US. So they are the cheap platform provider and have some great funds as well, like the life strategy funds, which are multi-asset, and I've talked about before. But they haven't conquered America. They still account for, I would, from when we were talking to the guys there, it was around 25% of the market maybe. The point is, whether that accuracy of that figure or not, most of the sales in America is still very much done through a financial advisor. Vanguard are not going to conquer the UK overnight, and they don't even think they will. But the other thing is, you look at the US, you can see that they're going to come, that all this robo and passive investing is going to actually gain much bigger traction than it does now, but it's not going to become the dominant way of investing for quite some time. But if you look at other industries, it's always interesting to see how they go. Now, the one that I would draw parallels with is driverless cars, because driverless cars, we've always known that's got to have a human to drive a car. So we've driven cars, you've drive around. The idea of getting a car with nobody in it but a machine driving it would put the fear of God up a lot of people. Now, ignoring one or two of the accidents we've heard about with driverless cars, the way they started to get people to adopt it with Uber, so Uber being the cab service, the idea of a taxi driving up with no one driving it and someone getting in it, they had to have a pilot, a human pilot, who sat in there in case something went wrong. And that was also to give comfort to the human. And I think there was some discounting going along as well with the person who took the ride if they actually accepted it, because they had to see how driverless cars would work in the real world. I think what we're going to get is a human overlay on a lot of this technology that is very much minimal input, just there to make people feel better and just there to check that nothing goes wrong. And then in time, as people get used to the technology, once the technology has been proven to be robust, and in the investment world that means to deliver not only cost savings but performance as well, then I think that human element will start to disappear. But we're miles away from that. But one of the things that the research did highlight more than anything, which was really just kind of scaremongering a bit and saying millennials won't do it and all this, no one's going to like the robos, they're all going to want humans. Millennials, by and large, don't have the money to invest. The people who invest are, I can tell you this because I see the data when I look at money to the masses, the people, what they do, what they read, what our typical audience who likes the investment stuff is between the ages of 35 and 55. That's a sweet spot. And the reason that is because that's the point when you suddenly have had children, you suddenly get back in the real world, you're no longer punch drunk from screaming kids, you might have some money finally where you're not sort of paying out hand over fist for things, and you might then start to realise that you need to save for your retirement. So it's always the point at which people invest. So millennials are less likely to embrace robos anyway at this point in time because they don't have the money. They can't even buy a house, so they're probably not going to invest. So one of the things the research did do, it was kind of scaremongering along that way a bit, but what it really highlighted is the underlying belief, the elephant in the room, which they weren't talking about, and that is that people assume humans can always do better than machines. And like I said, it may be a combo of the two that we need, but if you just look at that man that I spoke about earlier, Neil Woodford, and his current woes, he's now, if things are going from bad to worse for him, he's been dropped by nearly every platform out there from their best buy lists. Now, that guy could walk on water. He could apparently turn water into wine, if you sort of believe some people who are investment commentators over the years. But even he can't outperform in all market conditions. And so the idea that a human and human error, because of what they're going to do, that emotional investing that can occur, computers won't do that. Equally, the idea is that a human should apply the brakes when they need to. But using that same analogy, we've all seen the unfortunate videos when the accidents happen with the Uber cars or whatever cars it is, the driverless cars, the drivers, the pilots very rarely have time to apply the brakes anyway. So the future of robos, just to round up, is, I think, bright. It's still very, very small in terms of what people are doing with it in the overall scheme of things, but it will grow. It is accelerating, and it's just about the idea of people getting used to the technology and them having a track record which proves that they are robust and they deliver.
Very good. And it's interesting that you use the analogy for the driverless cars, because it was only last night that I was watching something, probably on YouTube, and a video came up and I watched a whole interview with Elon Musk, the guy from Tesla, talking about driverless cars and the future, and he predicted that it's a couple of years away now, I think, and his basic idea is that they're currently at a position where it's possibly 1% chance that you might be in an accident if you're in a driverless car, and people would only generally feel safe if it was somewhere around the mark of one accident in 1,000 lifetimes. That's what they're aiming for. They're shooting for the stars in terms of, the stats.
Yeah, and I can you can just see the marketing message, can't you? You've got more chance of dying crossing the road than you have in, and that's what they'll go for. But yeah, I find all that technology stuff is fascinating, and Tesla themselves is a fascinating story. I mean, the guy is he was apparently the inspiration for Iron Man, the character what's the character in the Avengers and Iron Man? I forget the
people are screaming.
Yeah, they are. They're getting Damien. You know nothing. Whoever the crazy guy who made all that stuff, that's who it's really based upon, and he's like that because if you see, I'm just going off on the side before we finish this week, but he recently did an investor commentary. So they do videos, so investors dial in, can ask questions. These guys fund his company and fund his ability to make flamethrowers or driverless cars or whatever it is he's going to do. And he had an analyst ask him questions, and he just turned around and was making comments like, "Oh, this is boring. Oh, I can't believe this. We're boring questions," and just basically sounded
petulant
child. And eventually just stopped answering them and went, "We're going to YouTube," and went over to some sort of YouTube thing. So yeah, he was just using the old boring fingers in your ear job. So a fascinating character, but it'll be interesting to see what actually happens with the company, because I know they've had some people with some concerns.
They announced this week that they're cutting 1 in 10 jobs in an effort to actually finally become profitable, because in all the years that the business has been run, they've been funded by investors and they've made constant sort of losses, albeit the products and the technology that and the brain behind it all, Elon Musk, everyone agrees, he's a genius and it's amazing. But at the end of the day, people want to see a profit. At some point, they've got to turn a profit. So it's interesting.
And they'd also quite like to see a car, because a lot of these cars haven't been made yet, and they've put in huge orders. But
good stuff. Okay, so if you want to get in touch with Damien, please do so. And actually, more importantly, this week, even if you've not got a question or you don't want to review the podcast, if you could go on to the fundraising page, which Damien is going to read out right now.
justgiving.com/fundraising/money to the masses.
There we go. Go on to there. Show some love if you can. We'd really, really appreciate it. And we'll read out anyone who wants to be read out next week as a little thank you. So yeah, that's it for this week. If you have any questions, of course, you can always email Damien at moneytothemasses.com, or get onto Twitter at moneytothemasses. Damien, we're done.
We're done. Until next week, Andy.
Don't forget to claim your free copy of Damien's best-selling book, The 30-Day Money Plan. Sort your finances in just 5 minutes a day, worth $4.99. Just go to moneytothemasses.com/podcast to find out how.